think is the next, reasonable opportunity, and ask them to engage. Thank you for being here.
Great, thank you, Chair Palmisano and members of the Budget Committee. My name is Jeff Johnson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Minneapolis Convention Center. With me virtually is Chris Hunges, our Director of Business Services. Also, our partners from Meet Minneapolis, Melvin Tennant and Sandy Christensen. The Downtown Assets budget includes funding for the Minneapolis Convention Center, Target Center, PV Plaza, and Commons Park. Funding for these assets flows predominantly through event revenues and the hospitality sales taxes that include a sales and use tax, lodging tax, liquor tax, and a restaurant tax. And the entertainment tax is collected in this fund but passes through to the general fund. Next slide, please. Taking care of our clients and our facility consume the bulk of the convention center's program dollars. Inside the greater downtown budget assets for the budget for downtown assets. The Target Center receives funding for debt service, capital needs, and an operator reimbursement for expenses incurred by the operator ASM Global. Next slide, please. The 2021 budget has been challenging for many reasons as COVID-19 has impacted the hospitality industry in devastating ways. The revenue streams that I discussed earlier have been severely reduced due to the pandemic and the corresponding health and safety restrictions against travel and large gatherings. Projections are that the tax revenues will not return to normal in 2021 and may take several years to recover. Spending by our attendees in downtown drives tax generation, business growth, and job creation. Local taxes are behind last year by about 36%, with some individual taxes down by over 90% on a monthly basis. These reductions hurt the Downtown Assets Fund, but they also hurt our local businesses and residents through a ripple effect of business closures and job layoffs. The pandemic has severely disrupted the model that supports the downtown assets. Due to this reality and the impending slow recovery, we have had to reduce our expenses through a series of difficult reductions. Next slide, please. The Downtown Assets Fund started 2020 in fantastic shape with a balance of approximately $60 million. Most of that balance will be used by the end of 2021. To help cushion the impact to the fund, the Convention Center implemented bold reductions in 2020 spending once the pandemic hit. In 2021, we will continue this process through reductions of $6.7 million, which includes significant reductions in our part-time workforce of 42.6 FTEs. Now, our total FTEs are only 173, so we will have reduced about a quarter of that total. Because these layoffs were to our part-time staff, the numbers of human beings affected are more than double the FTE count. We will also reduce our capital expenses drastically to only what is needed for repairs until future years. Our facilities department has also placed stringent energy saving protocols in place that have yielded us savings of over 60% of our normal $250,000 monthly utility bills. Most of MCC's full-time staff will be on budgetary leave until we are back hosting events again. We find ourselves in a difficult situation of planning for our return to activity without knowing when that return will happen. We must be ready because we do have contractual obligations with our clients and must hold their events whenever allowed. Next slide, please. The other members of the downtown assets are also contributing to our reductions. The funding for the Commons has been eliminated as the Park Board has taken over operational ownership of the park and will pay for its expenses through their portion of the tax levy, as with other parks in the city. The Target Center has reduced its non-obligated expenses by almost 35%, Capital projects will be deferred to future years. PV Plaza has contractually obligated expenses with its operator Green Minneapolis, and those will remain in force. Next slide, please. So thank you for your time today and for your commitment to the hospitality industry. This budget predicts that we will start to recover sometime around the start of the third quarter in 2021. Throughout the coming months, we will have to be nimble with the management of our resources so that we are ready to serve our city and our clients when it is safe to do so. That concludes my presentation, and I would be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We have been thinking a lot about the visitors to our city and how deeply our hospitality industry is being impacted due to the pandemic. And I'm curious, I'm not seeing that I have any questions or thoughts from my colleagues. Colleagues, anything else that you would like to ask Mr. Johnson or add? Your situation is pretty clear. It paints a stark picture, but it is pretty clear. I'm not seeing any. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Next up, we have our Information Technology Department, and I will invite Fadi Fadil, our Chief Information Officer, to give that presentation. Welcome, Director Fadil.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, council members. Thank you for having us today to give you an overview of the IT department budget for 2021. Next slide, please. So as you can see, our IT budget, IT funds are distributed across three main categories, and those are infrastructure, workforce enablement, and decision support services. So our infrastructure is your network, the wireless, the servers, the devices that we use, even at the endpoints with employees, pretty much all the hardware and software required to run it. And of course, a very big and huge component of that has an escalating importance, and that is the cybersecurity piece. The second category is everything that rides on top of that infrastructure. And those are the systems, the tools, the enablement solutions, the IT projects, pretty much everything that runs on that infrastructure, the use of technology across the city. And the third category is the decision support services. And this is basically the intelligence of the city. What do we do with these tools? What information do we get out of these tools, and how do we stitch them together? The integration of it, turning data into usable, consumable, actionable information, and parts of how that comes to fruition is data dashboards, trend analysis, visualizations, and cross-referencing systems and information with each other to create a new set of information and bring those to light that help with a data-driven decision-making capabilities in the city. And as you can see, this is the smallest category of our investments in technology, and now we feel that we're in a place that we could leverage that category more as the power of information keeps escalating, and we need it more than ever in order to make data-informed decisions. Next slide, please. Okay, as we progress to next slide, we will, next slide, please. So when we go to the base cuts of IT, it breaks down into the following categories. Oh, back one slide, please. Yep. So where we have managed to meet our targets for budget cuts, the first thing is that IT will no longer to be leveraging consultants and staff augmentation, and now we will be solely relying on our existing IT staff, and this will be not just absorbing work that we were outsourcing, but actually also absorbing a set of domains of IT work. And I call those domains because they're very, it's a whole operation that goes from solutioning to execution to infrastructure needs to the support and training. So for example, how we are meeting today using Teams is a good example of what those new capabilities that we have to provide in order for the city to be functional in a remote environment. This also includes the infrastructure around VPNs, remote access systems that now that we have to move into remote capability and invest more in our cloud strategy. And of course, with that, the escalating cyber needs. We do very well in the city in terms of our cyber posture. A good analogy of that is in an enterprise of our size, the cyber situation is more like a duck. So above the water, we're calm and smooth sailing, but underneath the water, our feet are kicking, and we're going full speed to make sure that the city is information and residents' information is private and protected. Of course, with that new remote realities, we have to absorb a lot of work around digital engagement. It is now the digital engagement more of the face of the city, how we interact with our residents and how we communicate. So we have a lot of additional work, and actually we've picked up the pace with regards to providing information, making it public. We will be coming before you soon to talk about our new approach to our website and public dashboards and how that's going to move us towards our vision of a smart city. So basically, we have shifted gears tremendously overnight, and it's a good analogy of that is the whole city going from diesel to gas. Actually, a better analogy is a whole city is going to solar overnight, and all the infrastructure and that changes and adoptions that have to go with that. So these are some of the new domains that we have to absorb that I wanted to highlight for you. In addition to that, absorbing IT staff that were initially for a long time funded by IT projects presented by other departments, and we know now that these projects are slowing down, and yet this staff is very important and essential to our city, so we absorbed those capabilities. Actually, we are on the previous slide. Folks running the slideshow, please, if you can go back one, reading off of the bullets. The second piece where we have managed to absorb our cuts is basically looking at more free and innovative solutions. And basically, this is more like we're taking the bus more than taking the car and the expenses that goes with that. So we have been able to let go of some systems that do cost us quite the amount in IT budget, and we're relying now on innovative solutions produced or built by IT staff, or looking at more free options and open source options. So this is what we call it. We're starting to take the bus. Another piece where we are able to meet our budget cuts targets is we're freezing the refresh of the few technologies. Let that be some of the end user devices like the laptops or the servers or the infrastructures. This is quite important not to skip. However, the realities of that we're living do push for us to try to milk another year or two out of some of the things that are due for refresh. This is something that we don't want to dabble with too much, because that's what we call the technology debt. We might skip changing the roofing on the house this year. We might kind of be okay with not painting the sides this year. We'll take a year or two out of that, but this will always come back. So we call that the technology debt because you don't want that to rise too much. So if we were to use a football analogy, we're having a bye week, and that's where some of our cuts are coming. And I think finally we're again, I think I did highlight that, but using more of the free solutions to sustain the quality of our mission critical systems and preserving our cyber security posture, which is actually have increased significantly as events kept unfolding this year. Next slide, please. So while we progress to the next slide, we are on slide 5. As you can see, and I highlighted this already, the IT workforce enablement services. This is where we have a portion of our cuts, and that is where we absorb more of the existing duties with our absorbing existing duties that we used to augment outside of IT staff and leveraging that internally, and discontinuing the use of tools that tend to be sometimes expensive, and looked everywhere where we could find free and innovative solutions to leverage this work. Slide 6, please. We highlighted that as well, but basically this is where we are leveraging another year where we skip refreshing some of the infrastructure. This is what we highlight as the technology debt. And slide 7, this is some of our contracted services that also are around the decision making and support services. These are your data connections, integrations, visualizations, that wisdom that the enterprise can have from looking at its data and help decision making. We're not losing capabilities, we're actually picking up the pace, and as I highlighted, we'll be coming before you very soon to show you the first set of tools that are the fruits of the work that we've been doing internally. And with that, I do want to acknowledge the amazing IT staff that mobilized overnight, were able to absorb the new domains of unexpected work. And I think as the city of Minneapolis, and compared to some of our sister cities, we have been trailblazing in many areas, and we have not slowed down and actually picked up the pace with our strategic plan around getting to the vision of smart city. And that is based on a strategy of digital quilting that we will be highlighting for you. But the idea here is it's a see, understand, and act. So see the data, that's making it visual, making it consumable, making it understandable. So that's the I, and that's what we call that's where the internal and public dashboards are going to be able to highlight. Second thing, understand is understand what you see, analysis of the data, making the connection, understand that that's a door, not a fridge door or a window. And finally, taking action. That is the thing, which is the enablement of providing consumable and actionable data. And that is the action, the hands and the legs. And IT is positioning itself very, very strongly in being able to meet those needs. And with that, that concludes our my highlight regarding the IT budget for 2021, and I stand for questions.
Thank you, Director Fadil. I don't see any questions or comments yet, but I do need to share that our city enterprise simply could not have adjusted to this pandemic and to this new normal of a remote working environment with the capability to protect our workforce without you and your team. You're a visionary CIO director, and you were on the job less than 6 months, I think, right, when COVID hit. And we as a city we've become ever more reliant on you and your team to keep all of our enterprise service programs functioning and to continue to serve our community. So thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, and I'll just echo those extremely positive comments. I think there's a lot of appreciation around the whole enterprise for the work that IT has done to help us keep connected to each other during this really challenging moment. You know, one of the things that you always think about in tight budget seasons is both that you want to find savings where you can, but also you don't want to miss the opportunity to make investments that can produce savings in other ways. And a lot of times the efficiencies that we gain in IT investments end up representing themselves in other parts of the budget as savings. And so I guess I think there's always a challenge to sort of justify leaning into new investments at the same time that we're talking about cuts. And I guess I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit about how you've approached that and sort of how you balance both the potential for producing savings with new efficiency using technology against the challenge of justifying investments in a tough budget cycle.
Absolutely. This does tie to our strategy and vision of arriving at a smart city. Smart city is a city that does leverage the most valuable commodity on the planet more than gold, and that is information. Taking data and turning it into information. So I'm just going to move down the path here. So that's the vision. The strategy to get there is digital quilting. Everything needs to be stitched together, cannot be working in isolation. So how do we get that? That is a discipline that that best summarized by intentional IT. We have got to be intentional in everything we do for the big picture and not just be executors and producing a system here, a system there, technology there. Everything is done with an overall view. So when we approach things that way, and this is an internal governance and discipline that we have installed within our IT department, instead of rolling the sleeves and get to work right away, we're looking at the big picture. With that, the first type of savings becomes if we see a system coming in or an investment coming in, first thing we look at, how does that fit in the big picture? And that highlights existing systems that already do the same thing. And that's how you eliminate redundancy. That's the savings of not double dipping on two systems. And if the new system is better, we retire the old system, and that will become the standard. The other piece here is every system or every investment that we have, you know, as technology systems now being introduced, there's always a data element. So again, this digital quilting thing allows you to say, all right, this data, first, is it secure? Is it private? How is it going to integrate with other systems? Integration for us means automation. That's going to eliminate a lot of the manual work. So wherever we see an opportunity for introducing a system that also allows to automate some of the manual work, that will produce some cost savings in terms of workforce, time, and resources. Does that answer your question, Councilmember?
It does. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a similar comment, and this second bullet on the 5th slide that says discontinues use of certain expensive tools. Just, I'm so grateful for that approach. In my time in office, it's been a bit hard to watch these big, expensive database projects that then often are followed by an enormous amount of staff time learning to use the expensive new database, and then it actually never really fit our needs. And as a policymaker, you know, there's things that are easier to intervene in than others. And so it's just really so refreshing and a relief to have a leader like yourself who is being so strategic and so careful with our public dollars and really fitting the right technology solution to the right problem. And I know how much you are supporting all the department heads, our community, the kids who are distance learning. I know we stole you from the school district, which they remind me during our frequent check-ins. I check in with the chairs of the other legislative bodies frequently, but they're so appreciative of your ongoing support for our young people who are distance learning. And then I also just wanted to uplift how much IT is really stepping in to help our city use data to make policy decisions, both informing staff and policymakers. And I think it's an area of improvement for our city to better track data, to build on our data transparency and open data policies that I know Councilmember Johnson started back when we first took office. And just really digging into how we can make that data more readily available, make sure that we're sharing that data through new websites and web resources. So I just can't say enough good things and want to appreciate all the extra work that's happening in the IT department with all of your staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I didn't realize this morning that I will be using the bus analogy as much, but I guess one thing here also for us in another comment to highlight about our approach is that we are using more of everybody gets on the bus versus everybody has their own car. So that is a savings there. And at the end of the day, we should all get on the same bus because the city is, our success is us all in all facets of the city to head in one direction. So it's also a strategy that helps us unite our digital vision for the city. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Director. You're getting a lot of appreciation in the meeting chat bar here. And I think it's also important to compliment you and your team on your ability to fend off the number of intense cyber attacks that occurred in May and June on our city infrastructure. I am curious, do you think that some of these planned budget cuts in the 2021 budget would impair our ability to continue that defense?
Our number one priority, the one thing that we will not compromise, is the cybersecurity. And you cannot say the word cybersecurity without saying data privacy. We are very mindful of the fact that for our residents to trust us with their data, and for our staff to feel safe with their data, this is our number one commitment, and we're not being lenient around that area. And if it has the slightest negative impact, we would find our cuts and savings elsewhere. But I would, and I cannot speak too much publicly about our cyber posture, but I can tell you that it has significantly improved rather than being sustained. And like I said, we are like a duck. Our feet are kicking underwater heavily, and unfortunately, the realities of 2020 have introduced a lot of sharks in the water. But I guess practice makes perfect, and we have got to keep those standards really high up. So rest assured that we're doing everything possible and more, even in terms of opening new innovative doors and introducing new strategies for our cyber posture.
Thank you. Councilmember Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to thank our director for all of the work that he did when the pandemic hit to ensure that low-income families in the racially concentrated areas of poverty of our city were able to get access to Wi-Fi. So I would appreciate any work and effort that we can continue to sustain on that front, because I know that with distance learning and some folks with the privilege to be able to work from home instead of going to a retail center or a shopping center, I think that demand certainly presented itself, and you rose to the occasion. And it would be great to just have you keep us updated on what the continued plans for that will be, how the city will be a player in that moving forward. Because we do know that even though the city, I think did a good job of stepping up, we still, I think, have some folks with low connectivity and access issues. And it would be great to just feel really confident about that path forward for the next 6 to 9 months, in case that, Minneapolis Public Schools and others do go back to in-person learning and in-person work sites. So thank you, Director.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that, Council Member. I'm not seeing anything else from my colleagues. Thank you, Director Fadil. And we will move on in our Budget Committee agenda. Next, we have our Chief Human Resources Officer, Patience Ferguson, to give us the HR Department's presentation. Director Ferguson, are you there?
I am here. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm just going to provide a brief overview of our department, and thank you so very much for supporting human resources and supporting the work of the incredible employees in the city of Minneapolis. Could you please go to the next slide? What we have here is just an overview of where the funding for our department comes from and the various streams, as well as the different areas of human resources, which are administration, business partner solutions, labor relations, learning and development, total compensation. That also includes the health insurance fund, as all of you know, that is self-funded through our self-insurance. Next slide, please. And if you would go to the next slide, we're going to talk now a little bit more about our base cuts. As we're all aware, the events around the pandemic has really impacted not only our community at large, but it has also impacted our workforce and also impacted our work as an employer, as a City of Minneapolis employer. And so whether it is managing all of the kinds of things regarding our health and the health and safety of our employees, we have been really working to ensure that the core delivery of services focusing on compliance requirements is not diminished as a result of all the different things that we have to do. And so with that in mind, we have focused on supporting the health and safety, diversity of our workforce, and also the compliance associated with the different actions that we've had to take in response to the severe budget cuts in the enterprise. As a result of that, and anticipating a reduction in recruiting, we have been focusing our attention on not only the current changes that have had to happen from a compliance perspective, but also looking at how we can support the enterprise and how potentially we have to do work differently. With that in mind, we are prepared to support our workforce planning efforts designed to shape the future of work, focusing on supporting, embracing, and championing racial equity and change. If you could please go to the next slide. What the base cuts mean for the Human Resources Department. We have eliminated a few positions, and as a result of that, there will be very limited face-to-face customer service. For example, because we are no longer working within the building, we do not have as much need for face-to-face contact with the public. And also, we do anticipate that there will be slower response time to several of the customer departments that we currently work with. Examples of some of the non-personnel impacts are around professional development, external investigations. We tend to do external investigations when it involves a department head or elected officials, and so we are anticipating reduced funding for those types of activities. Training, seminars, and also professional and organization memberships will be severely cut and reduced. Next slide. As it pertains to the enterprise work over and beyond the investigations that I mentioned, we have had to pivot to doing more work from a virtual in learning and development, looking at more virtual work. And so what we have done is eliminated certain aspects of that work, and actually, quite frankly, have been very successful in pivoting to doing virtual and online training and development. We are seeing an increase in activity in that area. We've also seen an increase as it pertains to people really taking advantage of those services. And I want to particularly commend the IT team for their work and assistance in really helping us go from in-person training, which also includes our compliance training, to really being able to do that work from a virtual perspective. As it pertains to our total compensations solutions division, we do have a position that will be retiring in 2021 that will not be refilled. And what that means is we will have a slower response time for our classification and compensation requests and studies. From a non-personnel impact, we are working to look at other ways that we can take some of the work that we were doing from external consultants and bringing that work in-house. That does, however, mean that there will be limited tools that we have historically used regarding management assessments, DISC assessments, and strength finders. These are assessment tools that really help our leaders and managers get a better understanding of the certain skills or certain abilities that they can look at to really embrace and improve their work in terms of how they lead and manage people. We also are we also will anticipate there'll be less opportunities for us to do the cultural agility training that we have typically farmed out. And then we'll also have less employee support during our open enrollment times. Also, there will be focus more on the compliance related to health, wellness, and benefits due to the reduction of staff who will have the time or the capacity to be able to do that. Next slide, please. With all of the changes that are going on in our workforce and as an employer, we also recognize that we have to balance the compliance kinds of things that we definitely have to do with really supporting the work as we as an enterprise meet the workforce challenges in what we're calling the new normal. If you could please go to the next slide. So I wanted to just give a brief overview regarding what we as a city accomplished in 2019. 38% of our new hires were women and 41% were BIPOC employees. 37 of those were women that were promoted, and 29 of the people that we hired that were promoted, those who were promoted were BIPOC employees. With that in mind, we are really going to even more so have a stronger focus on looking at our data, given the fact that we know that we are having furloughs, we are having layoffs, we're having early retirements. We're doing a lot of different things that we have to do, quite frankly, because of the budget, the way our budget, how we have to manage our resources. So we're going to even have more of a focus on looking at how all of these changes that the city have to make, how that's going to impact our work with our BIPOC and female employees. We want to not lose any ground because we've made great strides this year, but we have to continue to look at the data We have to also look at what policies and procedures we need to look at, and we will continue to make a strong commitment in that area. Also, we will continue to focus on looking at workforce planning, succession, and really strategically helping departments look at how they might replace positions when retirements occur. Next slide. Also, looking at recognizing that work has changed and we're not likely to return to our old ways. So we need to look at how we can use technology, flexible schedules, remote access, and teleworking. And also, again, as I mentioned earlier, utilizing the virtual learning training experience. Also, we will continue to look at how we can work with our labor partners on our enterprise goals of equity in the workforce. Next slide. Thank you very much for your time, and I am happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Director. Not seeing anybody in queue right now. I want to recognize you've had a challenging time around everything that's happened in 2020 in helping to support all of the employees here in our city. Again, not seeing any questions for you right now. I'm sure there will be later as we move forward with additional budget discussions. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I will look to transition and say we will finally hear from our Civil Rights Director. Velma Corbel is the last presentation for this morning. And Director Corbel, I heard you earlier. Are you ready to go?
I am. Thank you.
Yep.
Good morning, Council Member Palmisano, Chair Palmisano, and committee members. I'm Velma Corbel. I'm the Director in the Minneapolis Department of Civil Rights, and I am pleased to present the Mayor's recommended 2021 budget for the Civil Rights Department. And also connected to this call this morning are the leadership team members from the Civil Rights Department. Frank Reed is on the line, the Complaint Investigations Division Director. Imani Jafar is on the line from the Office of Police Conduct Review. Brian Walsh is on the line from the Labor Standards Enforcement Division. Cassidy Gardner from Civil Rights Equity, and Andrew Hawkins from our Administration Division. And I just wanted to take a little bit of time before I jump into this to just not only recognize the leaders who are on the call, but also to recognize the entire staff in the Civil Rights Department. With all of the things that have happened with regards to the pandemic, these folk have pivoted and become the virtual workforce powerhouse that they are. They have, some of them have lost friends and family members. We've had some babies born. But through it all, they have pivoted to this virtual reality and continue to do tremendous work on behalf of the city of Minneapolis. And I just wanted to take that opportunity to say thank you to them and to just let them know how appreciative I am of the work they're doing on behalf of the city. The Civil Rights Department, in our minds, have always done race equity and social justice work. And now more than ever in the times in which we are living, the work we are doing is even more important and more critical. And as I talk about some of the impacts that this 2021 budget brings, I will also talk about some challenges and how we are planning to overcome them as we move into the 2021 performance year. So if you could go to the next slide, please. This slide is just a representation of the roughly $5 million general fund budget that is distributed across these various funds that you see. Most of the resources that the Civil Rights Department is expensing its operation to come from the general fund. And you will also see on the right of the chart how those funds are distributed across the divisions. It's a relatively even distribution. And as we talk, next slide, please, about the base cuts to the Civil Rights Department, you will note that the base cuts also include dollars that are equivalent to about 2 FTE reduction to the staff in the Civil Rights Department. Next slide, please. The first division we'll talk about is the Administration Division. And as I mentioned, Andrew Hawkins is on the line, and Andrew leads the Administration Division for us. In the past, the division has served as mostly a repository for our general service dollars, such as rent and utilities, our information technology, service charges, etc. But going forward, we are centralizing some tasks in this division. So it will be responsible for management of our annual budget, staffing, and workforce planning, our strategic planning efforts. This division also is responsible for our file, our data, and information management. And it really serves as our main external facing entity to deal with such things as our website and any outreach that we do to communities. There is no personnel in this division as of yet. We'll probably do some transfers in 2021, just kind of collecting and curating all of the personnel charges from the other divisions where the people are distributed now to move those over into administration. But the only cut there is a non-personnel cut, and that is to those activities that I mentioned, such as the rent, utilities, and information technology services. That results to about a 5% cut to that division. Next slide, please. And our complaint investigations division, for those that might not be as familiar with the work in this division, it is our traditional civil rights division, and it enforces the city's anti-discrimination laws through the city's own civil rights ordinance, but it also managed a work share agreement with the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The main challenge with the cuts that you see here on this slide, about a half of a person and a couple $1,000s on our non-personnel impact. This half a person that you see that is reduced this year is a position that was approved in the 2020 budget. So it doesn't affect a body because no person was in that position, but we are reducing that division by those dollars. The challenge to this is when this position was approved at the beginning of 2020, it provided a little breathing room because, as you know, most of the dollars that are spent in this division are for people, and complaint investigations is really reliant on people to do the work. And so when we are reducing this division, this budget with dollars, we're also directly impacting our ability to bring in people resources to be able to help us do this work. This division also staffs the city's Commission on Civil Rights. And what we see as a challenge here is similar to what the Human Resources Director said, is we're going to see some, elongated time frames in terms of case processing. We are going to, with our virtual workspace, we are going to be limited in just how much outreach we can do. We are also going to be limited in just the efficacy of trying to do alternative dispute resolution or conciliation in a virtual world. That has been a challenge for us. But again, our folks are creative and they're figuring out ways to absorb this cut, but also to continue to do the work. But I just wanted to just put the city as an enterprise on notice, as well as people who are looking for us for services. There are going to be some slower processing times with regard to this work because it's so people heavy. Next slide, please. Our next division is our contract compliance division. The division director in this role that you see here, where there's talks about personnel impact, Sean Skibby left the city about 3 months ago and took a job with another government agency. So the personnel impacts that you see include the contract compliance director position, but there is not a person in that position now. And then the contract compliance officer position, that's a vacant position, again, one that was approved in 2020. So while we are reducing the budget with these two positions, no employees were directly affected by these reductions. The non-personnel impacts are $4,000. This division has not seen any decrease in the work that it is doing for the city with regard to the work that it does with ensuring that women and people of color are gaining access to city contracts as businesses and as employees, because the work there has not slowed down. If you recall, construction work was designated as essential work by the governor through all of the emergency declarations. So the work that this division is overseeing, the city's construction work, also did not slow down. And so they've stayed busy. We had asked for an additional position in the 2020 budget. We got that position. It's now reduced. And again, it is just causing people to have to do more with less. And they've done an admirable job with it. The one challenge that I see, in addition to how labor intensive this work is, and now the challenge that the employees will undertake in a pivot as a result of this pandemic, this also would have been the year where we would have come forward with a request for resources to do a new disparity study, because as you know, the disparity study is the evidence that's used to determine whether or not there is discrimination in the marketplace with regard to utilizing businesses owned by women and people of color. The disparity study that we are using right now is from data that is about 7 years old. This would have been the year that we would have come to the city to request resources to do a new disparity study. We are not doing that in the 2021 budget. It is unlikely that we will do that in the budget for 2022. At some point, that is going to be a request that will come from this department. And so I just want to put people on notice of what is going on with the disparity study for this year. Next slide, please. There is no personnel cut shown for the Office of Police Conduct Review and a small non-personnel cut. But right now in the Office of Police Conduct Review, we are holding 2 positions vacant because of the hiring freeze that we're in. And I can tell you that it is even more critical in this day and age that the Office of Police Conduct Review have the resources that it needs to do its job. That office is evaluating and reviewing thousands of hours of body camera data as a result of the complaints that are filed. That group also staffs the Police Conduct Oversight Commission. The commission is doing its audits and looking at how it can be a better resource with helping the city collect data with regards to community safety. That this division is also really just getting out from under a significant workload that was created after the killing of George Floyd. They received thousands of emails that had to be sifted through by the staff in the Office of Police Conduct Review to be able to determine which of those emails and online complaints and telephone calls were actually legitimate complaints that should be handled by the Office of Police Conduct Review. And if you recall, in the Office of Police Conduct Review, parties have an opportunity to request whether they would like a civilian or a sworn investigator. And 99% of the complaints that are filed in the Office of Police Conduct Review are coming through the civilian intake. So this is a significant workload that the team has been handling. I don't foresee that that is going to subside. And I want to just put the notice out there that these positions that are being held vacant. We are most definitely going to request the waivers on those hiring freezes so that we can get the load of work that is required of this team completed. Next slide, please. There is no personnel cut identified for the Civil Rights Equity Division, and as you will recall, the Civil Rights Equity Division is not only the division that is doing work around Strategic and Racial Equity Action Plan, the disparity study, the citywide response to anti-Asian racism during COVID-19. It's partnered with city staff, other city staff on the census experience, etc. But you also recall that this is a division that oversees the city's Urban Scholars Program. And the Urban Scholars Program, as you recall, was actually created during the last recession in 2008, 2009. The program was actually created in 2011 as a direct result of the racial disparities that were identified across Minneapolis. That program, the Urban Scholars Program, now has been around for a while. It is every year is increasingly better and better. And even this most recent summer, the city hosted 22 urban scholars. And I would say kudos to Cassie and her team because the program was all virtual. They pivoted immediately. The urban scholars, supervisors, and mentors in the city were outstanding. Thank you to the mayor for making sure that dollars for that program remained in the 2020 revised budget. And thank you to the city council for continuing to support that program, and to Cassie and her team for making sure that we were able to have a virtual program in 2020. And we are, I'm hopeful that we will continue to see this program in 2021. Next slide, please. There is no personnel cut for the Labor Standards Enforcement Division. However, we did get a position approved in the 2020 budget that remains unfilled, and that is a critical position that does need to have someone doing the work. Because as you will recall, not only is the Labor Standards Enforcement now doing sick and save time and minimum wage enforcement, it's also doing wage theft, and our newest ordinance that was approved that is effective in January is our freelance worker ordinance. And that resource is critical. The Labor Standards Enforcement Division has been absorbing that work, but it is it's critical times. And I'll tell you just a quick story about how critical this work is in the Labor Standards Enforcement Division. Just since we've been in the pandemic and right after the civil unrest following the killing of George Floyd, we had a situation on Lake Street where our contractor, Saytool, noticed that there was a new employer in town that may not be familiar with the city's labor standards ordinances and recognized that there were some employees on that site who may not have been getting the minimum wage per the city's ordinance. They did some on-the-ground work. They notified the Labor Standards Enforcement Division. Labor Standards Enforcement staff actually went out to Lake Street, to the job site, and interviewed some of the workers. And what they discovered is, in fact, that that employer was not aware of the labor standards provision that are a requirement of the city. And they were able to identify those employees who were not being paid properly, but also had some significant conversations with the owner to make sure that the owner was aware of the city ordinances so that the wage discrepancies for those employees were corrected, but also going forward that there are no further violations of the city's ordinances. And this work is important, and we believe that you pass these ordinances so that we could make sure that people who are working in the city of Minneapolis are treated fairly. Next slide, please. That is the Civil Rights 2020 Mayor's Recommended Budget in brief, and I am happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Director. I'm seeing Councilmember Gordon in queue.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate the report. I wanted to ask a little bit about the complaint investigation division. You talked about some vacant positions. How many currently right now are vacant?
The position in the complaint investigation that is vacant is that's funded in the general fund is $40,000 from the base cut, and that position, there's not an FTE that has been created to go with those dollars, so those dollars are being cut, but we are down. That would make us down one position in the complaint investigations division. And Councilmember Gordon, you will remember, you've been here a long time, and you'll remember when I first got to the city, we had those deep, intractable, really backlogs of cases, and we worked really hard to create processes and bring the right people in, the right number of people to make sure that that does not happen again. And, right now, complaints are generated by people who are working primarily, because most of our complaints are employment related complaints. So if there is a silver lining, because we don't have the workforce back to 100% in the city, that there is some lag there. But as soon as people start to return to work again, that's when we see our employment complaints increase. We've also been paying particular attention starting last year and now this year to our fair housing work. And so where that employment complaints have tapered off, our fair housing work has actually increased. And so it's critical that we continue to be able to investigate those complaints to get things handled within the year's time frame. Because Councilmember Gordon, you will remember that we actually decreased our time frame for investigations down to 270 days. And most of the enforcement agencies in the state that are doing these types of investigations have as their deadline the 360-day cutoff, because that is what the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity requires. But in the city of Minneapolis, we wanted to do a little bit better than that, recognizing that there are people on the ends of the complaint, the respondent and a charging party. So we wanted to get these done a bit more quickly. And with the downsizing in this division and the increase in the workload, those timelines are going to be challenged.
I also wanted to ask about the police conduct investigations too. Did you mention that you were going to be requesting some waivers for some positions there as well? And was that for 2 positions?
Right now, we have a person who is not in the division because he's out working elsewhere in the city on a detail. And we also have a vacant position that was created by resignation, voluntary resignation. And we've not filled those positions. And so they are in this hiring freeze bucket, and we have not yet done the hiring freeze waiver. But I do expect that we will be doing those.
I think this work is going to be critically important going forward, and as my colleagues will know, I'm working on amendments to the police oversight ordinance as well. I know that we're trying to work on things like an early warning system, and lots of work that I think that civil rights investigators could really help with. I think this is important. I was also really struck when you said 99% of the complainants are requesting a civilian investigator, and maybe this is a question more for our budget director. I'm curious about what the proposed budget is to the internal affairs. I know historically they've had quite a few more complaint investigators than civil rights has. So I'm not sure if Micah is available or somebody else is from the budget office who could just remind us what's the proposed budget going to internal affairs, and maybe compare that with what's going to the civil rights police complaint investigators.
I do know that Director Intermill is listening. I'm not sure if he has that information at his fingertips. Director Intermill, are you?
Madam Chair, yep, Madam Chair and Councilmember Gordon, I am here. Unfortunately, I don't have that information right at my fingertips, but I could gather that and send it around to Council to make sure that you have it at your fingertips soon.
Thank you.
That would be wonderful. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Councilmember Cunningham in queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Corbel, for all that you do and all of your amazing staff. I'm very grateful for having such strong leadership when it comes to civil rights, so thank you. I'm curious about circling back to the disparity study. I'm curious about what the consequence is for delaying completing the disparity study.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Cunningham, the delay is, well, first of all, the disparity study is calculated based on the number of ready, willing, and able businesses that are out there that can respond to the types of scopes of work that are done in the city of Minneapolis. And a best practice is that that disparity study would be completed about every 5 years. And we have surpassed or bypassed that 5-year mark. So what is happening is the business situation in our market area is dynamic. So there are businesses that are being created. There are businesses that are going away. There are businesses that have changed the scope of services that they can offer. I'm certain that there might be some challenges to some businesses as a result of the pandemic, but unless we are actually counting the businesses that are ready, willing, and able to do business with us on a regular basis, and again, that best practices is 5 years, our calculation on availability on which we are basing our equity performance, our equity and inclusion performance, is could be a little bit off track. And so fresh data is important when we use that as the basis for our program, because that is, we have to be able to withstand legal challenges around the specific race, the race conscious goals that we're setting on our contracts.
Thank you for that, Director. I think that the important highlight of that is that it helps with the legal defensibility of, you know, when we step into the space of trying to directly address racial inequities.
Right.
So that I want my colleagues for us to just be very aware of that as we are talking about eliminating racial disparities. We will not have updated data to be able to aggressively pursue that. So there are consequences for us not having this. They are very expensive. So that's another one of the challenges. They're very expensive. And as we're, looking forward, and as legislators, I just think it's important for us to make sure that our investments are aligning with the goals that we set as a city. And we have set a goal of eliminating racial disparities. And it's very hard for us to do that without updated disparity studies and that data that comes from it. So I just wanted to make sure we didn't glide too quickly over that, because there are consequences. So thank you so much, Director, and thank you to my colleagues.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to make one other quick comment about the disparity study too, and this goes back to a staff direction that was authored by Councilmember Gordon. right after we presented the disparity study about 4 years ago, and that staff direction was related to taking a look every year at our disparities, especially around Latinx and American Indian-owned businesses, because if you will remember, for those who were in that presentation, the disparity ratio was shown to be very low in those areas. And there was a concern that the city might not have captured everything, because even then the data that was used to do that analysis was about 2 years old. And so we made a commitment to come back and look at that data on a regular basis. And so in addition to that larger disparity study, there are also these annual check-ins that were required as a result of that study. And the last point, Madam Chair, that I would just raise is that, you know, we've got lots of heroes in the city of Minneapolis, the first responders notwithstanding, but I also want to just point out that I mentioned that in our contract compliance division that we are without a division director in that group, but Brian Walsh has graciously stepped in to lead that division as well. So in addition to the work that he's doing with leading our labor standards enforcement division, Brian has also stepped in to lead contract compliance. There were some efficiencies there that we saw. There's some related work, especially around the wage enforcement that we saw where that made sense. But I wanted to just make sure that everyone knew that we were not leaderless in that group right now.
Thank you. I think we're all familiar with Brian Walsh and all.
Of course.
I see others in queue. I did want to briefly step backwards to Councilmember Gordon's question to the budget director. Thanks to our new budget system, the director was able to quickly pull the answer to that question. Director Intramural.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, looking in the budget data, there is a reduction to the internal affairs budget when comparing the 2021 mayor's recommendation to the 2020 council adopted budget. That includes 2 vacancies that are being held open and unfunded in internal affairs, totaling about $200,000. So to answer the council member's question, there is a reduction, and I'll just note, not only was it the good work of the new budget system, but also our budget staff who are helping remotely to pull answer to these questions. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
So my question wasn't what's the reduction. My question is how much money is internal affairs costing us total? And I'd like to know, how does that compare to the police conduct investigator budget over in civil rights?
So, Madam Chair and Councilmember Gordon, the budget in total for internal affairs in the mayor's recommendation is just shy of $2 million. The budget in total for complaint investigations is about $727,000, and Director Corbel would be much better positioned to speak to the breakdown in terms of complaint investigations, in terms of how the time is spent within that total.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Director Corbel, did you want to add anything?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Gordon, within the Office of Police Conduct Review, there are three investigators and 1 body camera analyst right now. And I can't tell you what the number is in the Internal Affairs Division. I would have to go back and look at the police department's budget, just like the budget director would have to do to figure that out.
Thank you so much, and I'll do some digging around myself too, but if you do take some time and find some stuff out, feel free to share it with me.
I will.
Thank you. We have Councilmember Bender in queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I remember the debate from 7 years ago about the last civil rights study, and Council Vice President Glidden, I think, got it through. My questions were about the impacts of the Human Rights Department lawsuit on your staff's capacity. I know that civil rights is one of the departments that is heavily involved. Which staff from civil rights are doing the work of that response to the lawsuit from the Human Rights Department? Yeah, and I just kind of wondered how it's affecting staff capacity for other things.
So, Madam Chair, Council President Bender, the bulk of the time that the Staff and Office of Police Conduct Review needed to expend with regard to the human rights complaints happened at the very beginning. We were talking about the one stipulation on the body camera audit. We are not defending the lawsuit. Of course, I'm sure during the course of this investigation, the staff will be responding to questions that might be raised by the investigator in the Human Rights Department, but we don't know what that time is going to be, what time is going to be required as a result of that. What will happen, though, is as a result of the body camera audit, the staff has identified the necessity of likely adding 2 positions to be able to deliver the work that is identified in the body camera audit provision that was submitted to the Human Rights Department. We don't have those positions identified in this budget, but that is what was identified when the report was submitted to the Human Rights Department.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And I do want to follow up because I think overall civil rights is a department where we've asked for or are experiencing additional workloads. The police conduct complaints that you mentioned, Director, the lawsuit from the Human Rights Department, and then all of the other needs from the other divisions around enforcing our labor standards, that fair housing complaints, that we, wage theft. We want to make sure that we have the capacity to enforce those policies so that they're effective in supporting the community in a way that we want to. I also wondered, I am not part of the police reform working group that the mayor has convened. I know Councilmember Palmisano is. I don't see any additional investment in civil rights for anything related to additional police oversight or reform. So I do want to follow up with that, either now if anyone has anything to share about the status of those efforts, or between now and December, because again, if there are recommendations coming from those groups related to reform and oversight, it feels important to make sure they are staffed. And I haven't heard anything about that.
This is Lene Palmisano. I can jump in here and just mention that actually at Monday's audit committee, we are going to go through some of this effort on what it takes for the Civil Rights Department to review body cameras. They've been working together on this initiative, so I think we'll hear more specific recommendations on Monday at the audit committee meeting for that particular part of it.
Great, and maybe we can get a report between now and the end of the year, but when we're voting on the budget, about any outcomes that might be coming from those reform tables.
Absolutely. I'm not seeing anyone else in queue. Seeing no further discussion at this point, I'll thank Director Corbell for your presentation and dialogue today, and I'll also direct the clerk to please file these morning presentations. At this point, I will recess this meeting until 1:30 p.m. when we will hear budget presentations from both our CPED, our Community Economic Development Department, and also the Health Department. Thank you, everyone. We are recessed until 1:30.